Okay, so I have my clips and my binding all in place, and I'm coming up towards this corner where our loop is. So when I get to here, I'm going to allow approximately 3 inches, or enough to create a loop before I start to go back down. So once I've worked out how much fabric I need or would like there, I will pull that part out and I will clip here, and I will come back and I will clip here. Now what we do when we sew this is we start down here about 1 inch from the bottom edge, so all the way around, and we stop 1/4 inch from that side seam. So put a little mark at 1/4 inch so that you know that's where you need to stop. So I'm going to start with a locking stitch, and I'm going to start, as I said, 1 inch up from the curved corner and ease around with our binding. Now it's a good idea to have your needle down function engaged so that when you stop, your needle stays down. Also have the foot to raise, so it gives you ease of manipulating your binding. So we're coming up close to our 1/4 inch mark at the top here, and when we get to that point, put another locking stitch or a reversed anchoring stitch, and then cut your thread. So what we need to do now is move our fabric out of the way so that we can sew down this side. And what we're going to do is actually sew from that point where that last stitch was. So I'll hold that out of the way, and we will start 1/4 inch in from that top corner. And sew down approximately 1 inch, and again engage our locking stitch so that it tightens off. So now we have our binding to that point, we have allowed our loop, and we've got our stitches joining up here. So what we have to do now is join the binding. So to do that, we're going to allow about 2 to 3 inches up from where we stopped, and I'm going to trim that off. What I need to do then, actually I'll trim that a little bit less. I need to bring this piece down, and I'm going to fold on that cut line. What I need to do then is open out the piece that I've cut off, and the width of that is where we trim this last piece off. So I'm going to trim that piece, the width of that. And then we join these two pieces together. Now when I'm doing that, one thing I like to do is fold my piece in half, and I actually use my binding clips to hold it in place, and that makes it easier to sew these two edges together. So what we need to do now is join our two pieces together on the diagonal. So I take the two pieces, I pin on each side, I pin along here, and I pin along here. So all 4 edges are pinned. What I do then is I rule a line, and I use the 45-degree angle of my ruler. It's a little bit tricky because it's a small project. So I use the 45-degree angle of my ruler and draw the line which will become my sewing line. And you'll see that that is adjacent to where this corner is here and also this point here. We've sewn on the line that we drew. We need to trim back to a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. Now we've joined our binding together, what we have to do is stitch the opening closed. So we've attached our binding to the back edge of our potholder. Now we need to turn it to the front and press it. And we also need to nick our loop. So we need to nick into where we started that stitch. On that side, as well as on this side here. And what we need to do is open this up and fold the edge in by 1/4 inch. So from that nick all the way around, we're going to turn it under 1/4 inch, right around to the other side. And I will press that down. And we need to do that on both sides. So we have both sides turned inward. So that our loop then looks like that. So I've turned the two edges in and pinned them together. Now what we need to do is press our binding on the flat sides so we can turn it to the front. And we will use our binding clips now to secure this in place. And just ease around the curved edges. And continue all the way around. Now when it comes up to our loop, what we have to do is also fold them in half, encasing the edge of our potholder. And when we sew all the way around the edge of the loop and continue all in one continuous motion. So I've turned all my binding from the back around to the front, and I've clipped my loop in half so that when we come around, we'll sew around the loop and then continue, and our potholder will be finished. But one thing that I have done is changed my bobbin. If you have a look on the back of the completed version, you can see that when I stitch the binding, the stitching is actually inside the edge, so you get a perfect edge on your binding, and it actually looks like part of the quilting on the back of the potholder. Now, what we do have to do, however, is when it comes time to stitch the loop, we do need to have our red thread top and bottom. So I will change the bobbin just to stitch that loop, and then I'll continue back with my cream bobbin. If you prefer, you could actually hand stitch that loop closed, and then you could stitch all the way around. The choice is yours. So I started stitching at the base of my potholder, and I'm stitching round. I'm coming up towards our loop. So I'll continue stitching close to the edge, and I'm going to move this section out of the way. And once I get up to our 1/4 inch point here, I'm just going to reinforce stitch and change my bobbin. So now I've changed my bobbin, I'm going to put my needle down, needle up, and I'm going to bring the new bobbin to the top so I can trim them off together, and I will continue carefully stitching around the loop, making sure that our two pieces are together. It's a little bit tricky getting in here, but it's worth it in the end. So once I get to this point back to the 1/4 inch over, I need to change my bobbin back again. So again, I'll do reinforced stitching, trim it off, and you can see now we have our loop in place.